Welcome to the Champaign County Deputy Registrar training. I strongly encourage you to simply watch and listen to this presentation. You do not need to take notes. Everything we discuss here is in the Deputy Registrar manual. This presentation will take approximately 15 minutes. Once the presentation is over, review the manual and then take the quiz. Both items are on the Deputy Registrar page of the Champaign County Clerk website. What does a Deputy Registrar do? They register eligible voters and they authenticate identities. When a deputy registrar registers someone, they verify the individual's identity at the time, as opposed to the voter having to do that at the polls the first time they vote. This makes the voting process more efficient. It means those voters will not be required to show ID when they vote for the first time or when requesting a vote by mail ballot, making for a more efficient process and minimizing identity concerns for election judges. Let's discuss the requirements to be a deputy registrar. You must be registered to vote in Champaign County at your current address. Watch this entire presentation, read the manual, and pass the quiz. All total should take 30 to 45 minutes. It is important that once you are deputy registrar to follow the program rules and regulations. If you do not, your status can be removed. Let's review what a deputy registrar is expected to do. Register any eligible voter in the state of Illinois. Register voters anytime except for the 27-day window before the election. It is important you stop registering people at the correct time. If you are registering people past the deadline and return the forms to the clerk's office, we cannot legally process them, and now this individual thinks they are registered to vote, but they are not. During this window, all forms of paper registration are closed. The only option is to register online or register and vote in person during grace period. Take care of your paperwork. It is very, very important that you take care of your paperwork. The two-part voter registration application is numbered. You will be issued 25 forms within a certain range. You are responsible for these forms. You must account for each form that is issued to you. If you make a mistake and must void the form, turn in the voided form with your completed registration materials. Take your time when completing the forms. It must be legible for us to register the individual correctly. The last thing we want is an individual thinking they are registered, but they aren't because the form was misplaced or too messy or too damaged to read. Follow the program rules and expectations. Again, these are important as you are acting as a representative of the clerk's office. Please make sure you have read page 3 of the manual carefully. Register voters until your commission expires, and then you must retake this class. Commissions last until November 30th of the next even-numbered year. What should a deputy registrar not do? No electioneering while registering voters with a deputy registrar form. Electioneering is promoting a candidate, cause, or political party, and that can be verbal or with attire. If you want to electioneer while registering voters, use the paper registration form, not the two-part registration form, and do not identify yourself as a deputy registrar. You cannot register voters where alcohol is being served, so use your judgment. And you cannot accept any form of payment for your deputy registrar services. So let's talk about the requirements to register. The voter must be 18 years of age on or before the next general election. If the individual will be 18 for the general, but not the primary, they can register and vote in the primary as a 17-year-old. 17 years old is the earliest that you can register someone to vote. They must have been a resident of the address they want to register at for the least 30 days prior to the election. If it is less than 30 days until the election, you probably shouldn't be registering them as a deputy registrar because the period has closed. They need 2 pieces of identification. Both pieces must include the individual's name, and 1 piece must include the individual's current address. And the voter must be a U.S. citizen. A U.S. citizen is someone born in the U.S., born outside the U.S. to parents who are U.S. citizens, or has completed the naturalization process. Individuals here on a visa are not eligible to vote. What is the definition of U.S. citizen? Most individuals are citizens because they are born in the U.S. Remember that includes more than the standard 50 states. Being born in D.C., Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands automatically grant U.S. citizenship. Someone born to U.S. parents outside of the U.S. is also a citizen. And naturalization is the lengthy legal process an individual can do to become a U.S. citizen. It ends with a court ceremony. Once an individual has completed the naturalization ceremony, they are eligible to register and vote immediately. One last definition is U.S. national. A U.S. national is allowed to work and reside anywhere in the U.S. without restrictions, apply for a U.S. passport, and apply for U.S. citizenship through naturalization. As a U.S. national, they are not able to vote. 2 forms of ID are needed to register to vote, and at least one piece of ID must confirm the voter's current address. These are examples of acceptable IDs. You'll need to use your judgment as a deputy registrar doing the registration. But as a reminder, the philosophy of Clerk Ammons is that we are working to enfranchise voters, so the expectation is that you are working with a voter to find an appropriate and acceptable ID and address verification document. You can accept a driver's license or state ID from another state if it is in current issue. These are examples of acceptable address verification. Again, you will need to use your judgment. However, a good rule of thumb is the individual's name and address should appear somewhere on the document together. You can accept a digital document as address verification, and this is usually the easiest and quickest way. If you're trying to register a University of Illinois student and they have campus housing, you can accept their housing assignment from the UIUC housing portal. Current means within the last 30 days, and this is specifically named in the Illinois Election Code. Most times, an individual's driver's license or state ID will not qualify the identity and address verification requirement. If the driver's license or state ID was issued in the last 30 days, then it would meet both requirements. Acceptable address verification documents are utility bill, current lease, current bank statement, current paycheck, receipt for online purchase with delivery. Criminal records and voting rights. The only demographic of citizens prohibited from voting in Illinois are individuals actively serving a prison sentence. That can be a conviction in state or federal court. Prison is where people go when they have been sentenced for a crime. Anyone in prison cannot register and vote. Jail is mostly people waiting for their trial. They have not been convicted of the crime and can therefore vote. Individuals with short sentences may serve them in jail, so it's always important to check with the individual before registering them. Some states bar anyone with a felony conviction from voting, even after they have served their time. Illinois does not have this law. Individuals with felony convictions are eligible to vote once they are released from prison. Registration of a homeless individual. So first, let's make sure we all understand the definition of homeless as it pertains to election law. A homeless individual is any person who has a non-traditional residence, including but not limited to a shelter, day shelter, park bench, street corner, or space under a bridge. Individuals who are homeless can register to vote. For their address, they can use a shelter as their official address. They just need verification from the shelter that they accept mail for that individual. Your manual has a list of shelter addresses in Champaign County. Verification can be either verbal from a shelter manager or a written letter from the shelter. Any person that changes their name must re-register to vote. They cannot just simply update their name. They have to redo the entire registration process, meaning they have to provide a new ID with a new name and new address verification with the new name. It is the same registration process, but they just need to do it again from scratch because of the name change. If an individual is currently registered to vote in Champaign County and changing their address within Champaign County, they may complete the change of address form. They are not required to re-register to vote or provide ID unless use the change of address form in your packet. It is not considered an address change when an individual is changing their address to a jurisdiction outside of Champaign County. The individual must register to vote in their new election jurisdiction. Do not use the change of address form for an individual who is registering outside of Champaign County. Complete the form and return it to the office as you would a deputy registrar form. Now we're going to talk in detail about how to complete the Deputy Registrar two-part form. You complete the Deputy Registrar form, not the voter. The info needs to be legible on both copies. Use black ink and press firmly. It's a duplicate form. Write legibly. If we cannot read it, we cannot register the voter. Again, you complete the form, so please print legibly. On the top of the Deputy Registrar form, it has a space for voter ID number. You don't need to fill that out. Names are better if it's their full legal name. For example, Stephen instead of Steve. The address must be a residence, not a P.O. box or a business. Always ask if there is an apartment, unit, or dorm number. In your manual is a list of all the dorms, their names and addresses, in case you have a new student who doesn't know their complete address yet, but make sure you do get their dorm number on the form. Their mailing address can be a P.O. box if they prefer to have their mail sent somewhere other than their actual residential address. We ask for telephone and email to have a way to contact the voter if there's an issue and to share voting information. We do not share this info. Please do your best to get both. The identification process is where they must have their driver's license number, state ID number, or the last 4 digits of their social security number. We need one of these 3 in order to process the application. For sex, circle whatever the individual chooses to identify as, and Illinois just passed a new election law allowing for a non-binary gender choice. So if they would prefer to identify as non-binary, you can just simply put an X in this box. Prior registration information is not required, but it's only needed if they are registered outside of Champaign County. If they're registered in Champaign County, you shouldn't be using this form on them anyway, and we'll go over that again later. But if they are registered outside of Champaign County, this information is helpful in us expediting changing their registration from their prior county to this county. This section is only needed if the individual was born outside of the United States. If they were born to at least one U.S. parent, check born to U.S. parent, and you can move on. You don't need to do anything else in this section. If they are naturalized, which is that formal immigration process that takes years to complete, check naturalized and enter the city, state, and date of their naturalization. Month and year for their naturalization is fine if they don't remember the exact date. Make sure their phone number and email are listed so the clerk's office can follow up with them if needed. Most international students at the U of I are here on a student visa, meaning they are not eligible to register to vote. Once the document has been completed, ask the person to raise their right hand and read the oath to them. The voter does not need to repeat anything. At the end, they should say, "Yes, I do," or something of that nature. The oath must be read in full out loud by the Deputy Registrar. After they have agreed to the oath, have the voter sign in the signature box, and this is the signature that will be used at the polls to verify their identity. You complete the other lines on the document. If the individual is unable to sign their name, they still have to make some form of a mark in the signature box, and then you would need to complete section 3. Complete the required info. Distinguishing marks is important because the election judges will not have a signature at that point to use as identity verification at the polling place. Under reason for inability, just select unable to write. There is no need to ask the individual what their disability is. The voter again must make their own mark of some kind in the signature box. If they don't, we have to reject the registration and follow up with the voter to get that kind of mark. Complete the date and time, and then you sign. There's a reason we call it a 2-part form. It's because it makes 2 copies when you complete it. After completing the form, separate the copies and give the green one to the voter and keep the white one for the registration process. Return the completed white form within 5 business days to the clerk's office, and the hours and location are listed in the manual. If you mess up on a form, keep it, write void on it, and return it with your completed forms. Registering by Deputy Registrar is only one way to register, so let's review what the other options are. The motor voter form can be used if the individual doesn't have ID on them, doesn't have time to fill out the Deputy Registrar form, or isn't sure they want to register. Just give them the form and remind them to mail or scan and email it to the clerk's office. If they register with this form, they may need to show ID the first time they vote. You have these forms in your packets and yours are highlighted. If you make copies, please try to highlight. People often miss parts of this form and their registration is then incomplete. The form asks for the same info as the Deputy Registrar form, and the voter can complete it themselves. Online voter registration is quick and easy. When an election is close, we will put the link on our homepage, but the link is always available on our website under Register to Vote in the Elections section. For online registration, the voter confirms their identity with driver's license or state ID number. Let's review all the different ways to register to vote really quick. So Deputy Registrar, which is what you're going to do, Motor Voter, which is available up until 27 days before the election. It's also just called paper registration, and that's the form we just talked about where you can give it to the voter and they can take it and complete it themselves. And online voter registration, which is available until 15 days before an election. Grace period registration and voting is available 26 days before Election Day. Grace period registration is available at all polling locations. It has the same ID requirements as regular registration, and the individual will register and vote in the same trip. Election Day registration is also grace period registration. It just extends through Election Day. And again, it's at every polling location, and it has the same registration requirements as all other types of registration. This completes the PowerPoint presentation, so let's talk about what your next steps are. Review the Deputy Registrar Manual. Take the online quiz. Once you have passed it, contact the clerk's office to set up a time to come into the office to take the oath and collect your Deputy Registrar supplies. The links to the manual and the quiz are on the website at champaigncountyclerk.com/elections/become Deputy Registrar.